Hello everybody and welcome back to our ranking of the top 100 best games of all time. As a quick reminder before we begin, recall this list is not based on my opinion. Instead, I compiled data from thousands of fan opinions to create an aggregate list. Though it may not be exactly my opinion or yours, it should be a fun comparison to your own thoughts as a standardized list. Without further ado, let's jump in with number 90. Number 90, Marvel's Spider-Man.
Same old me.
Marvel is a phenomenon like no other we've seen in the cinema, so it's natural the Big D would want to transfer that success to games. Not that there haven't been loads of Marvel titles over the years, particularly for Spider-Man. Now, if there's a single thing you would want a Spider-Man game to absolutely nail, what would it be? An emo goth phase? Absolutely not. Pizza delivery? No, well, those were pretty fun. Web slinging that's good?
Bam! Just like that. That's all there is to it.
For over a decade, Spider-Man 2's web slinging was crowned the best. Many games came and went, but none could ever capture the same magic. A decade after The King of Sling came out, Insomniac Games of Spyro and Ratchet & Clank fame began development on a new Spider-Man title. The game launched in 2018 as a commercial slam dunk. It stands as the highest initial weekend sales for any Sony title ever, with 3.3 million in 3 days. Oh, and it sold 37% more in its first month than every Spider-Man game's first month sales combined since 1995, and recently was crowned as the highest selling superhero game ever. That's an astronomical level of success that is even more impressive when you consider it's a PlayStation 4 exclusive. In this case, with great sales comes a great game. It is truly the penultimate Spidey gaming experience. Stepping into the shoes of a seasoned Peter Parker, you get to balance his life as a superhero and citizen through a gripping narrative that strings those two sides brilliantly. Many iconic characters make an appearance, some even being playable in short stealth segments that add another layer to the gameplay. On the flip side, there are loads of notable villains with excellent development and creative boss battles. The combat is spectacular, feeling similar on a surface level to the Batman Arkham style of fighting, but tuned more for finesse instead of brute force. The stealth works quite well, and there are plenty of ways to get creative with all the gadgets at your disposal. And the world it's all set in is a joy to explore because yes, they nailed the web slinging. The entire momentum system creates a dazzling flow to the rhythm of zipping, slinging, running on buildings, and vaulting off water towers to gain speed. It's everything players hope for in a Spidey traversal system that made many a player shirk off the idea of fast travel when completing the game's many side quests and collectathons, all of which rewards you with a load of new costumes and powers. With all the care put into this game, it's a joy to play from top to bottom, and when you consider all the nods to the extended parts of the universe, I doubt this is the last we'll see from this iteration of Spidey. As for today, this recent hit earns a well-deserved spot on the top 100. Number 89, Nier Automata.
Alert. Large enemy group detected.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
To understand what makes this entry a triumph goes beyond the game itself. It all starts with director Yoko Taro. Quite the eccentric man, eh? They do say creative geniuses lean toward insanity. For years, Yoko Taro built his portfolio primarily through the Drakengard series under Studio Cavia, or a computer amusement visualizer. And no, that's not a joke. Before the studio shuttered its doors, a spin-off of the Drakengard series was released titled Nier Replicant, or Gestalt, or even just Nier depending on your console of choice and location. What didn't change was the growing cult following of fans that surrounded the series. While the gameplay mechanics of Yoko Taro's works garnered a mixed reception, his ability to tell unique tales that broke safer industry conventions were lauded widely. We're talking about a man who writes endings and works backward from there, creating emotional peaks to sprinkle throughout to keep players engaged in the most unconventional of ways. For example, in Nier Automata, you can trigger sudden surprise endings by even the most minor of actions outside of your implied role. These serve as vehicles for humor and a way for players to break from the developer's shackles for a brief moment. What Yoko Taro held closest to his vision was being experimental, allowing room for both developer and player creativity to breathe. This breath of fresh air is what drew fans into the Drakengard series and its spin-off Nier, those fans including the developers at Platinum Games, a studio founded by creative leaders that splintered from Capcom after working on juggernauts like Resident Evil and Devil May Cry. They too sought a way for creative expression to excel in the industry. Though over the years their works have leaned more toward licensed properties after underwhelming sales, they have their fair share of cult hits with notable titles such as Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. It was this expertise in action games that caused Square Enix and Yoko Taro to reach out to Platinum Games in the interest of creating a Nier sequel. Yoko Taro would direct and storyboard the game while Platinum could flex their action chops to create gameplay to match the tale. This collective brain trust was confident they could combine their strengths to create something that would not only be a commercial hit, but a critical one. And boy did their gamble pay off. To date, Nier Automata has sold over 4 million copies, a number that is competitive with the other 4 games in the franchise combined, and a Metacritic score that is 20 points higher than the closest of those titles. As with Taro's past work, the story was a design point of praise from fans to critics, with multiple crescendos across different endings, diverse characterization, and thought-provoking themes. All of this sets the background for the gameplay that is a dramatic improvement over his past titles thanks largely to Platinum Games. Their expertise in crafting action titles made for gameplay that match every beat of the story. From beat-em-up combat to flying segments reminiscent of Star Fox to third-person flying mech portions to hacking minigames, it's all metered together between melee and bullet hell styles that make for an intensity few games can match. This energy is amplified all the more by the award-winning soundtrack. The soundtrack is dynamic to allow for subtlety 1 second and then an emotional explosion the next. There are multiple versions of each track that range from quiet to loud, no vocals to full operatic, and even synth versions to match the hacking segments. Each track is a remarkable piece that is worth a listen on its own absent of the game, but within the game are synchronized in a way that heightens emotions along an exponential ladder leading to the game's inspiring end. When packaged in with the unique narrative, excellent action, diverse gameplay styles, desolate world design, and memorable characters, the unforgettable score is a massive cherry atop one of this generation's finest games, one well deserving of a spot in the top 100. Number 88, Resident Evil.
Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
While the voice acting may be the real pity here, that's all there is to chastise about this landmark horror title. Created as a reimagining of a similar yet more primitive title in Sweet Home on the Famicom, Resident Evil hit at the perfect time on the PlayStation to cement survival horror as a genre in the gaming space. Not only that, but Resident Evil is often credited as the match that sparked the cinematic zombie craze that lasted nearly 2 decades, with highlights such as 28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead, Zombieland, and The Walking Dead. Not to be outdone, it even spawned its own movie franchise that grossed over $1 billion at the box office. And of course, it's the birth of a gaming series that ranks top 20 all time for franchise sales. So what was it about this 1996 hit that started a zombie revolution? Simply put, it was the closest thing to date that resembled a horror experience at the cinema. For starters, the jump to 3D allowed for more lifelike cinematics. Sure, we can laugh it up in 2019 with games like Uncharted 4 giving pauses to whether you're watching living, breathing people, but back in the PlayStation era, the leap to 3D was remarkable. I remember watching these games with awe at a tender age thinking, golly gee, it's never gonna get better than this. Hindsight is 2020, and even without it I was a naive buffoon, but the point is at the time this was truly cinematic. And sure, the voice acting sounds like they bribe people to intentionally give the worst performance possible, matched with written dialogue that makes Duke Nukem Forever look like a Shakespearean masterpiece, but it has an odd charm that is reminiscent of mediocre acting in campy horror flicks.
This house is dangerous. There are terrible demons. Ouch!
But even if the pacing of the dialogue bulldozes forward with laughable inconsistency, the remainder of the game's content is perfectly metered to challenge and terrify its players. The ambient sounds create a thick, foreboding atmosphere. The setting trapped within the mansion encloses you in a claustrophobic hell that eats away at you. The unique tanky control scheme and perspective creates a mounting tension around every turn. The limited resources make every zombie encounter heart-pounding, and all this creates an unnerving pressure that puts you on edge even when tasked with solving the game's many puzzles. Every bit of this game is crafted to give you a real sense of terror and dread, and it excels in that regard to this day. The game has even been remade to further preserve its legacy, a legacy that is inseparable from its impact on the horror medium, one that won't soon be forgotten with the recent resurgence in quality with Resident Evil 7 and the Resident Evil 2 remake. But for today, we celebrate the OG for its well-earned spot in the top 100. Number 87, The Secret of Monkey Island. Ahoy, ye mateys, and welcome to Malay Island, a place for swashbuckling pirates, dreams of treasure, and dames worth risking your hide for. Such is the tale of Guybrush Threepwood, a young lad that aspires to be a pirate and ends up saddled deep within a conflict with the undead over his lady fair. Now, we aren't talking the great granddaddies here, but this point-and-click adventure spinster is well within the retirement homes these days. But like Resident Evil, it can be credited in many ways for advancements within its genre. A notable difference between Monkey Island and other point-and-click adventures of its time is the lack of death as a prevalent consequence. Most games of similar ilk would force players to solve puzzles or bite the big one to keep you stuck on a linear path that allowed little to no freedom. Monkey Island instead removed the penalty of death in favor of letting you explore, talk with the citizens of Malay Island through dialogue trees, and use a handful of commands to solve puzzles in advance. The relaxed nature this provided gave the game a presence similar to that of a movie instead of a choose-your-own path book that was riddled with bad ends. This let the excellent comedy and narrative take center stage, and they are without a doubt what the game is remembered most for. But I'll have to let that speak for itself. If the sound of hilarious pirate-themed adventures full of humor, charming characters, and engaging puzzles sounds good to you, you can't go wrong with The Secret of Monkey Island. Number 86, Soul Calibur. A fighting game that is a sequel to a game about people competing for an all-powerful evil sword that is now about how to stop the evil wrought by that sword by beating people with swords. In other words, this weapon-based fighting game was a hit sequel that differentiated itself from other fighting games of the time by providing a home console release on the Dreamcast that was superior to its arcade counterpart, which was quite rare at the time. This in turn made it one of the best-selling games on the Dreamcast. That is also reflective of its immense quality, providing a roster of roughly 20 fighters, many game modes such as team battles, survival mode, and a training mode that were all exclusive to the Dreamcast, on top of the already standard modes the arcade offered. The emphasis on weapons also provided the title with a unique selling point, but perhaps the biggest standout was the 8-way run system. Until this point, 3D animated fighters were always limited on a 2D axis, essentially making them 2.5D. Soul Calibur gave us all 3Ds by allowing fighters to run within 8 different movement axes that opened up a whole new dimension for the genre. These innovations, matched with prioritizing quality in a home setting and providing a top-notch fighting experience, made this series spiral into one of the most successful fighting franchises of all time, and that is largely thanks to the OG Soul Calibur earning it a spot in the top 100. Number 85, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Our first Legend of Zelda to grace the top 100. I don't think I'm blowing any minds when I say that this franchise, along with Mario, are the supreme duo of consistent quality from Nintendo. Twilight Princess is no exception. Boasting some of the finest dungeons, boss design, and item variety in the series, it was quite an achievement to send off the GameCube and herald in the Wii. Depending on which version you played, controls were handled either with or without motion controls, and the game was inverted. There's also an HD edition on the Wii U that includes many quality of life updates, such as being able to toggle between the wolf form at the press of a button. Interestingly, the follow-up to Wind Waker was originally intended to feature the same cel-shaded graphics, but was changed at director Eiji Aonuma's request in order to appeal to American audiences. With this change, Miyamoto asserted that the change shouldn't only be on the surface, but to the entire development structure. Rather than create a follow-up to Wind Waker, the developers shifted focus to creating a spiritual successor of sorts that accomplished what they couldn't with Ocarina of Time due to technical limitations. You can see this with features such as horse combat. The game also borrows other series tropes such as a light world versus a dark world. The game even runs on the same engine as Wind Waker, which is impressive when you consider the art style that leans toward realism while keeping a painted aesthetic reminiscent of a more restrained Okami. Or maybe I'm drawing parallels because of the wolf. Yes, most notably Link can alter between two forms, a wolf and human, which is integral to the gameplay and shifts between worlds. Each offers unique combat opportunities, ways to explore the world and interact with its inhabitants, and it's all tied into your relationship with Midna. I'm not here to interject my opinion on top Zelda waifus, but come on. The game features an interesting set of characters overall, some fan-favorite depictions of major recurring players such as Zelda, and different fictional races you've come to expect. These characters all weave together an emotional yet dark tale that is one of the finest the series has ever crafted, featuring the rare antagonist outside of Ganon. This antagonist represents a new dark race of Twilight monsters, at least it seems on the surface. As your conflict goes deeper and deeper, more of the world is unraveled, leading to twists, turns, and an unforgettable climax. But really, it's all subjective. At least I can affirm that the fans resonated with the quality of the story, world, characters, combat, puzzles, dungeons, bosses, an entire package enough for it to crack the top 100. Number 84, BioShock Infinite.
Booker, are you afraid of God?
No. But I'm afraid of you.
The original BioShock was regarded at the opening of the 7th generation to be one of the best stories in gaming, an ingenious spiritual successor to games like System Shock, and the City of Rapture being crowned as a brilliant spark of creativity in terms of setting. When you hit a grand slam like that with a new IP, it's a tough act to follow. Director of Irrational Games Ken Levine, rather than following a growing trend of playing it safe with by-the-book sequels, opted for a new world altogether for the follow-up. So how do you follow up one of the largest critical successes of an era in a city set under the the sea? By vaulting a city into the clouds with a momentum that matched it in terms of quality. Without mincing words, BioShock Infinite is an astounding triumph in storytelling through flawless pacing, a stunning setting, electrifying set pieces, deep characters, controversial themes, shocking twists, and a polarizing conclusion. So much thought was put into every inch of the narrative and world that critics and fans alike raved about it endlessly. While the story may be the main draw, the shooter gameplay featuring a gun in one hand and wild powers in the other is a thrill. Every shootout has so much thought put into the arena's design, from the varied gun variety in different areas, skyhook rails to fly around if you want to run and gun, and your companion allows for an extra layer by opening singular advantages one by one to assist you. She'll also chuck ammo your way and can delightfully take care of herself, as the cardinal sin of AI companions can be forcing their fate upon you. And yet, even with their safe in practice, the action and story's pressure never lets up, keeping a constant panic that energizes every battle. These encounters are matched by dialogue between Booker, the player character, and Elizabeth, your companion, and their relationship grows as the world, difficulty, and story do in tandem. You begin to care deeply for each other, which is all the more painful when you consider your purpose for escorting Elizabeth in the first place. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the noir-inspired DLC that brings the series full circle. Truly, I could rave about this game all day. If you've never experienced this masterpiece, you owe it to yourself to give this phenomenal entry in our top 100 a shot. Number 83, Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Another day, another Smash. Look, when you take a group of Nintendo's most beloved characters, throw in some lesser known properties, and then fan unexpected crossovers like Sonic and Solid Snake, you've got a recipe for immense hype. The third entry in the Smash Bros. Franchise had a lot to live up to. While the first game was a solid proof of concept, Melee is still to this day clutched handily by diehards with GameCube controllers as the best competitive game ever made. Even if you weren't that intense, it was a blast throwing down with friends on the couch. So when it came time to brawl again, fans were thrilled, mostly. While there were some detractors to the mechanical changes, it's indisputable that this game brought quality to the table in droves. From the robust Subspace Emissary campaign that was full to the brim with charming cutscenes featuring interactions between the oddest of allies, to the ever-amazing brawls featuring a new Final Smash Ultimate move that added a new wrinkle, new items, Pokemon, characters, the list goes on. Unlike many fighters, the game is very accessible for beginners, but still offers complexities that reward veterans and high-level play. While it may not have the nostalgic favor of Melee or the numerous improvements offered by the Wii U and Ultimate Editions, Brawl was an incredible experience for its time that is well deserving of its spot in the top 100. Number 82, Warcraft 3: Reign of Chaos. Before there was World of Warcraft, the franchise found its roots in real-time strategy. Enter Warcraft 3, perhaps the finest example of Blizzard's RTS work. The game features 4 different factions: the Human Alliance, the Orcs, the Night Elves, and the Undead. Each of these have their own campaign that fleshes out the world from varying perspectives. This weaves together an intricate tale as you learn more about the motivations of each group and how they impact one another. If single player isn't your style, you've got a choice to take on a computer or players online. While the campaign has various objectives, your goal in competitive play is to build up your resources and destroy all of your opponents. Perhaps the most influential feature is the addition of hero characters that level and gain power throughout each conquest. With their significant power over normal mobs, leveling them properly while managing resources is key to victory. If heroes farming for experience in the name of destroying enemy resources sounds familiar, consider that the modding scene for Warcraft 3 created Defense of the Ancients, or Dota. I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. Between modding resources from StarCraft and Warcraft 3, Dota 2 and League of Legends were eventually born. Considering the impact of those games and the modern era on esports and the PC gaming landscape as a whole, that's more than enough to cement its legacy. But when you consider how fantastic of an RTS Warcraft 3 is in its own right for single player and multiplayer focused gamers alike, it's easy to see why it lands in the top 100. And coming in at number 81, Final Fantasy IX. If The Legend of Zelda is a pillar of quality in the action-adventure landscape, then Final Fantasy has been a consistent force over the decade for turn-based RPGs. Though that may be the subject of more heated debate today than in the 90s and early 2000s, there's no denying Final Fantasy's lasting impact on the genre. Despite other games in the franchise garnering the lion's share of historical glory, among dedicated critics and fans, Final Fantasy IX has always been a dark horse for the best game in the franchise. In fact, if you put any weight into Metacritic scores, it's the highest rated Final Fantasy game on the website. Perhaps this is due to a return in roots, so to speak, in the design of 9. Rather than use a futuristic setting of the past few titles, the setting shifted back to medieval times that the developers felt reflected the meaning of fantasy. In many ways, the game pays homage to the original Final Fantasy while also giving nods to each of the games that preceded. Even so, the game stands on its own with fantastic characters that develop in meaningful ways over your journey, which is largely assisted by the game's signature active time events. These events allow you to view the experiences of party members and NPCs that are occurring simultaneously to your own and give added sense of scope to the world. Each party member provides different value to the team in terms of gameplay with their different abilities, which further helps you build bonds as you utilize them. Other aspects of the design, including combat, graphics, and sound, all rival the best the series had to offer in the era, and it wraps neatly into a package that is competitive against any of the games on today's list and even those to come. But what do you think about today's list? Are these games deserving of being in the top 100 best games of all time, or were there any vaulted to unwarranted heights? Tell us in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe for more of the top 100 games of all time, and check out some of my other rankings for bosses of various franchises in gaming. I want to thank you all for watching today. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.